President Zelensky himself has noted that global conflicts are fueling a frenzied race for new technologies and new lines of attack. Much of that, according to global experts, is playing out in the digital space, and cybersecurity is ever more crucial, not just for governments, but for people like you and me, businesses, large or small. Take Britain's biggest car maker, for example. Jaguar Land Rover usually produces 1,000 cars a day in the UK, but it had to shut its factories for weeks after a cyber attack in early September. Experts say it's happening all too often, and the damage runs deep.
But what I think people don't realize is how big of a global problem this is. Cyber attacks are costing us as a society over $20 billion a day. And these sophisticated attackers are targeting us, our organizations, and they're trying to shut us down and trying to lock up our files and prevent us from doing business or otherwise going about our daily lives.
Well, in addition to the disruptions and the financial consequences, of course, we're seeing cyber attacks that cause real human suffering. Hackers recently targeted a British nursery chain, stealing digital photos of more than 8,000 kids, along with their personal information. Some of it was reportedly released on the dark web. Well, Craig Jones is a former director of cybercrime at Interpol. He joins us from the Global Cybersecurity Forum in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia. It's good to have you today. Given what I've just sort of laid out there, how would you describe cybersecurity challenges in 2025, sir?
So I think cybersecurity challenges haven't changed over the decades, basically. There's weaknesses and vulnerabilities in systems and networks, and that's people as well. So what we're facing as a global community is a real existential challenge. We are unable often to protect our communities, our businesses and our industries. And we're used to things being free in this space. So when you add a cost into cybersecurity, companies and people are looking at that cost and deciding, well, where do we invest effectively?
Right. So let's just sort of lay the table, as it were, before we talk about what can be done. I mean, European leaders meeting today in Denmark to discuss strengthening cybersecurity. We recently heard from Moldovan officials with concerns over cyber attacks during their elections. Just how concerned should we be about cyber activity or cyber espionage before we get, a bit more micro and talk about our businesses and ourselves? What's the kind of broader picture here?
So we're seeing all the time attacks by states on states effectively, and whether they're for disruption, whether they're for espionage, whether they're intellectual property, these are going on an hourly, daily and weekly basis. And the challenge for those governments is how do they protect their critical assets? And people hear a lot about critical national infrastructure, but it's those assets of a country. How do we protect those? So when the disruption happens, like we saw recently at Heathrow, and the airlines are not able to run effectively because the digital capability is not working, then we see those real world impacts.
And we've just mentioned Jaguar Land Rover, the Holton production there. The government had to pledge a $2 billion loan to that company. We also had operations at some 30 factories of the Japanese beer giant Asahi suspended after a cyber attack. That caused a systems outage that crippled functions at nearly every part of its supply chain. What do these cases reveal about vulnerabilities in big business?
Absolutely. I think this is where we look at operational technology now. So operational technology runs those processes. Normally they're air-gapped from being connected to software. So they run independently and autonomously. Now we're seeing criminals attacking those operational technology systems because, as you've seen in the Jaguar Land Rover, they stopped all that production. And then there's that secondary consequence there. Those industries, over 100,000 people in that sort of Midlands, Birmingham area, those companies are now not producing. What that means now is people are potentially being laid off. And even when they start production again, that's not going to come on stream for quite a while. So that impact is absolutely massive at that time.
As I understand it, between January 23 and January 24, critical infrastructure worldwide sustained over, and I couldn't believe this when I saw the number, sustained over 420 million cyber attacks, equivalent to 13 per second. In your time at Interpol, you championed collaboration with the private sector and unity on a sort of national, regional, global scale. What's the current capacity to address cyber attacks at a national and transnational level?
So, if you look at the sort of intelligence agency level of that, coordination between like-minded countries, or that trust element is working fairly well. They are sharing their information about the attacks. But what we're missing out then is a whole tier of nations below that maybe don't have good capability or capacity. So Interpol's role was to help build out that capability and capacity with law enforcement, give them the tools, give them the information to help prevent, detect, investigate and disrupt cybercrime activity. And we did that very much with the private sector. Private sector hold that information, which is very much needed by law enforcement.
The FBI reports that cybercrime cost victims, individual victims, $16.6 billion in 24. $5 billion of that was people over the age of 60. I mean, which I find so depressing and so worrying. What can our viewers do to protect themselves online?
So there's some simple measures people can do, and it's very much like having a lock on your door. You don't open your door all the time. If someone rings your doorbell, you might check in the first instance. And if someone turns up on your doorstep trying to sell you something or an offer that's too good to be true, it normally is. It's the same, maybe you receive an email saying congratulations, you've won a prize, or actually there's a parcel waiting for delivery. Well, were you waiting for that parcel? Did you enter that competition? And that's where the criminals are seeking out those vulnerabilities. And coming back to that scale piece, that's now with AI, we're seeing that scope increasing massively. And criminals really are just swamping the internet with those emails, looking to attack the vulnerable people.
For leaders at the Global Cybersecurity Forum in Saudi, where you are now, I mean, some of these disruptive technologies, such as AI and quantum capabilities, for example, I know are throwing up serious challenges and opportunities, it has to be said. How are those there reviewing this risk landscape with these emerging technologies?
So I think this is where it's been very seriously taken. You've got thought leaders from around the world, not just from government, but also from the private sector, NGOs and experts, academia. And those are the challenges they're addressing. When we take AI, as I've mentioned, whilst it could be used for some fantastic things, what we're seeing is criminals starting to use that. And to start with, that was more on the volume side and using and crafting emails, but now they're seeing how can they use that to help them write code. So a criminal may not now necessarily need the skills of being a code writer, they can just ask AI to do some work for them, and then they can deploy that. So that's really, really difficult. In terms of quantum computing, I've heard a number of different dates about when that will be available, who will it be available to. And I think it's a bit like the cyber journey. That type of technology is probably going to be available at state level first of all. But what we've seen with the explosion of AI is that time to an initial idea and then something going into production and then criminals being able to get their hands on it has really drastically shortened. So this is where we need to identify those vital steps that we can take to minimise that threat that's going to be posed in the future.
It's good to have you on, sir. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Some news you can use there.